Well, delighted to be here, and
Yeah.
thank you for inviting me. It's
Oh,
exciting to
no,
be part of this.
absolute pleasure. We had so much fun the other day. It was just it was bound to be the next step, right? So
Yeah.
I love
Our,
talking to you. And I guess you guys in a heat wave like we are.
we seem to be in a monsoon season, so we go from spring-like weather, cool, to a deluge of rain that's been happening pretty much every day or every other
Oh,
day. So it's
right.
been odd,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
so far so good. We're pretty lucky.
Yeah, well, we're used to the cold weather here, and
Mm.
normally it doesn't warm up till May, but we started in March. So we're
Mm-hmm.
just really concerned about this hot weather, and
Mm-hmm.
it just has to get up above 80, and everybody's sweltering over here.
Yes, I know. I
Yeah,
spent many childhood going to vacations to Canada, and our summer pictures were us like bundled up.
yeah,
It was always a little chillier north of the border.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yes.
yeah. In Celsius, when it's anywhere above 8 degrees, people are already out in shorts and flip
Mm,
flops. And you know, hang on a sec, other people are freezing in that kind of weather. So interesting.
mm,
But look, thank you for joining me. Just if you don't mind, do a quick introduction. We're
okay.
really fortunate to have Julienne Ryan with us today. Julienne's a communications catalyst, and I'd love to talk a little bit more about that journey because I think you and I had some great conversations about that. Um, Helping clients through, a self-discovery, self-acceptance, as she connects them to the power of personal storytelling. And I think he got me to do some of that the other day, which was
I
really
did.
fun to do. So it was great. Jillian presents humorous, motivational storytelling presentations that celebrate her clients' challenges and hero moments. And again, those are really interesting points for us to talk about. Julian delivers learning sessions for clients, interactive keynotes, national and regional conferences, speaking at many engagements, sharing insights about communication, relationship, and leadership. And I think you present to a lot of organizational leaders and so forth. So great. Pleasure to have you.
Mm.
You're also you run a podcast and a guest and co-host on a podcast. Is that right?
I've I've dipped my toe into that with a colleague of mine,
Oh,
and
okay.
I tried a few episodes with not tried we did a few episodes called Kitchen Table Talks to
Oh,
talk about inclusive and diversity. So
well,
thank you for remembering that fact.
yeah,
So
yeah.
we're slowly moving forward on that, but that's great. And with another colleague, I forgot you. Thanks for reminding me. Another colleague who is in narrative with the storytelling group of
Mm,
business communications, Jerome DeRoy. I do some podcasts with him. So thanks.
yeah. We'll have to catch up with all these things. And
I know.
I noticed you have your book behind you there. So
I do. It's
yeah,
it's a constant companion with me.
yeah. So it's great. And the book is called The Learned It in Queen's Communication Playbook, Winning Against the Digital Distraction, which is fascinating title. And I know you're getting a lot of people excited about, that whole digital distraction and getting clarity and refinding themselves, I guess, for that's my language, but yeah.
Yes, that's a
Mm.
lovely way of putting it. And not only that I do that, by the time you finish reading the title out loud a few times, you have increased lung capacity because it is a long title. And I promise myself every time I have to type it in, and Prairie's like, next time a
Yeah.
shorter title. Like
Yeah.
I came up with the first thing, and a colleague, my editor, came up with the tagline. And I'm like, this is not a short thing to say on a regular basis. So
Yeah.
cheers to everybody who has had to read it and say it on a podcast or an interview.
Yes. Thank you for acknowledging that. So, earlier on, I was reading some of your background and so forth, and I remember reading something that you had started actually very young a career in acting, and I was just wondering how that's played out in your story. If I get you to tell us a little bit about your story for a change here.
Absolutely. When I Ironically, the fact I'm talking to groups is quite amazing because I was incredibly shy person and quiet. I was a bookworm, but I took dance, and my dance teacher thought I had some possibilities, and convinced my mother to take me for TV commercial auditions.
Oh.
Now, that would have been a great decision had they also included me in the learning process of what TV commercials entail. So I remember getting my first audition, getting brought down to New York City to a big size skyscraper at 666 Fifth Avenue for a Trident gum commercial, the name of the company.
Mm.
And I never chewed gum at home. So small issue because my mother was strict. She said, "Don't swallow it, don't swallow it." But I remember thinking, I don't understand this concept. So I kept chewing and chewing and smiling and smiling. Finally, I swallowed it. So I think the gum is still there. And then, so fast forward, I got the work.
Mm.
And my first set when I was on the thing showed a mini capsule of me as a person. So, I always love food. Great way to connect and thing. And they were giving junk food, which was a fantastic thing because they were, instead of eating junk food, you're going to eat this gum and have less, junk food. But I tried to rename their product during the commercial, and the director remember leaning over and going, "What are you saying?" And I was like, "Peppermint, peppermint. You know that happy flavor at Christmas? That little like pink and white candies. Don't you have those?" And he goes, "There's a one problem with this suggestion. We don't make that flavor."
Oh, okay.
So, and then I told this, I can't believe this like little tiny person piped up and said, "Well, you should. It's very good." And then the next thing I learned about myself there is I'm always very honest, transparent, and ask questions, sometimes to a fault, in a very respectful way. And I remember being really worried with the director afterwards that I was going to miss school, for somehow I thought this was my day job, that I had to show up to the studio every day and fit school in. After what time I had to be back in tomorrow. Wow. I was like 6 years old. And then it suddenly dawned on me. He goes, "Is this your first time?" And I told him I was a novice. You're not supposed to tell anybody your inexperience when you're acting. I said yes. I was very proud. Yeah. So that was my first experience. Yeah. So we'll leave it at that. But I had a little social security card. I had a check. I had to sign it, and wow. I was the starter fund for my college way back when. So, yep.
Yeah, and just that whole experience, I can only imagine how that's helped with your confidence, then shifting from that introvert to being on stage all the time and speaking with people and engaging people. Is that a fair assessment or not?
It was a long road between that moment. I'll tell you what happened in between. I learned about Teamsters. Quality assurance, because when Teamsters would cater, or the crew would cater events, I remember witnessing somebody who didn't do. The Teamsters were great; they were just like on the set and doing their thing. They ate first all the time. We treated the Teamsters like gold. But I remember there was one caterer got admonished for not being top quality, and I remember thinking, "Remember that, Jules. If you ever have to feed anybody, make sure everything's fresh and on point." But I was a shy kid and always very observant. Okay. And I had a wit, but I didn't always use it because I was a little kid and you didn't do that in school with your parents. But I always was taking in things. Right. So what happened is later on, I think I developed more confidence as I got older. And part of it was through asking questions. And it wasn't always me being in the center spotlight. Like I interviewed you basically during our short chat that became an hour long.
Yeah, that's right.
More and more questions to ask. I always learned that way and built rapport and engagement. And some women like to go buy shoes. I love to ask questions. That's my favorite thing to do besides sharing a meal with
And that's a really interesting insight because we often don't think of shy people as
Mhm.
observant, as good
Mhm.
listeners, or any of those things. You know, we just go, "Why don't you speak up?" You know,
Mhm.
so it's interesting, you know, because I tend to agree that the shy people are the ones that really have all the answers. They're taking it all in. They're observing. They're watching what's going on. So to leverage that and go to questions. I
I
know where
know.
you're going with that. You know, by the way, it's just really, really
It's
powerful
amazing.
stuff. Yeah.
I'm always amazed that I did. And I remember even years ago as an adult, one very good friend who's an author and a coach telling me that the next stage in her career, she wanted to give more speeches
Mm,
and present. And I remember thinking, who in their right mind would want to do that
right.
for a living? And then fast forward a few years further, I was like, this could be fun. I
Mm,
started doing training workshops and engaging staff in sessions and just having fun with it. So slowly but surely, I realized there's something magical about being with a group and seeing the energy shift or seeing the lights go on in somebody's forehead when they're
yeah.
starting to think and connect, and then they are connecting not just with me, but with other people in the room,
Mhm.
and seeing that transpire into a very good relationship. So that's the gift, making change happen with.
Yeah. Yeah. And so how does a shy person go from shy to giving all these presentations, and talking for an hour sometimes, right? Or more. Yeah.
Or more. I think it goes to, I mean, on the, we could talk about psychological, like on the
Yeah.
Myers Briggs. I mean, I'm actually considered extrovert, which I argued through every assessment I ever
Oh
had,
yeah. Right.
because I do um, absorb energy from the outside and the stimulus. But I am very happy in the introverted role, my own company.
Mm-hmm.
I like listening. I probably be rather talking to you and interviewing on this session, which I've always flipped the roles
Yeah.
sometimes. But I think it came from me realizing it's okay, that it's important for me to push myself to develop my voice and speak up. So with some encouragement and some good feedback from people, I start to edge forward in my work roles
Mm-hmm.
and stuff in front of groups. A lot of times, a lot of us, I'm sure it's no different with many people who are listening. We learn and make a change when our boss or somebody literally throws us out into public and say, "Guess what? You're the one who's going to talk, and you're the one who's going to speak." I have a boss I still keep in touch with from my
Mm-hmm.
early days in human resources, and she stretched me quite a bit
Wow.
to come out of my comfort zone. And I thank her. I was mad at her a lot. Yeah, I thank her for that.
So let's talk a little bit about the psychology of the storytelling, because really that's, I think, if I can draw a conclusion a little bit, that's your communication catalyst foundation.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me a little
The
bit about
word
that.
catalyst.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I'm going to just dial back to catalyst because it sounds very egotistical. I I was anointed that title by a friend of mine because we were brainstorming and saying, how can I talk about the fact that I'm not looking at people's communication from the perfect tagline, like on a magazine article or something. What I'm looking for is the connection between people and for people to discover what their gifts are and talents and their
Mm.
voice. And then as we do that, they are in a position to maybe be more accepting of other people and to listen. So it's a subtle multi-step process to develop our confidence.
Right.
So the catalyst was a gift from a colleague in the story. So and then
Okay.
I talked for a few minutes there and I forgot the rest of your question. So
Yeah,
come back to me
well, and
what the rest of it was.
so
Thank you.
the storytelling process and how
Mm.
that can help leaders and executives and teams and so forth, and very
Simply
interesting.
put,
Mm.
simply put. And I'm sorry we have a little delay, so I spoke over you there for a
That's okay.
second. It's when someone speaks about something and it is in story form, and their body language and their face changes and their energy. They've moved out of the left brain part where they're speaking in bullets and very hard cold facts or just information, and they're helping both parties, the listener and the person who's speaking, engage,
Mm.
because the whole brain gets fired up and the memory starts to kick in, and that person who's on the other side of the screen isn't just listening to what the story sharer is saying. They're starting to create a story in their head to connect with the speaker. So they're saying, ah, this resonates with me, that reminds me of a time. So there's a lot of brain activity that's happening, and it is an amazing way of building trust and just a gift of listening, because that is as important as the story we're sharing.
Mm.
It's when I do story sharing workshops or teaching and counseling, it's about teaching people how to share an information about themselves as well as receive it. And what happens in a lot of groups when we're teaching that feedback process, a lot of folks are a little overwhelmed at first because they're so not used to having somebody's undivided attention that's sustained for more than a few minutes,
Mm.
that's not interrupted, that's not critical, that's not you know, telling them to do something else, that respectful silence for a minute or two, we're not talking hours, is an amazing gift. And then having the feedback come to that individual of what somebody liked, key words that other person might have heard, and what they would have liked to hear more of. And that is the gift.
Mm.
And it can really turn into some amazing moments in rooms. So when I come in as a storyteller, I always say the best stories are waiting to happen in the room. Even though I think I can be entertaining and funny, the best part of the process is when I step away and I start listening. Now, the hardest part of the process is I don't get to hear everybody's stories in the
Mm.
room. I have to facilitate and listen, occasionally lean over and eavesdrop. But it's a gift when I see that somebody is stepping up who never thought they would speak in public
Mm.
or may talk to somebody they have never had a respectful relationship with, or a reasonable relationship, and change that dynamic. And those are some of the things that can happen
Mm.
and do.
So, am I hearing you correctly when I say that you start off sharing a story because
Mm-hmm.
that opens up the trust? Is that
Yeah,
the key?
it could
Yeah.
be absolutely. It can be a little vignette, or it could be a bigger story. Because in order to encourage people to take a risk, I have to be the risk taker as well
Right.
and be vulnerable.
Mm.
And that is a big thing. So it's figuring out what true story will work.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I do pull from childhood or some experience, or recently I think I mentioned to you I went to a live event for the first time in a year and a half, and I drew on an analogy of the event was in New Jersey, so I had to drive all southern New Jersey, and New Yorkers traditionally have a rivalry with New Jersey, but I harken back to childhood of a story or two about what it was like to be in the car when our family went to New Jersey to visit relatives, and the whole dynamic that was going on
Yeah.
and exiting. So it's kind of looking for a story or a moment that the other person will relate to. What will we
Mm.
have in common, no
Mm.
matter where we live or what we do? What do we share? We care for, if somebody has children, they care for their children. Most people like food of some kind,
Mm.
so it's figuring out those
Right.
where I can meet them in the middle and they
Mm.
say, oh, I
Mm.
get it. I can share something else. And if I can make them laugh, that's
Okay. So choosing the right story is
okay.
important. If you want, if I'm hearing you correctly, if you want someone to tell you how they got to be in the
Mm-hmm.
role that they're in, then you share a story about a journey that parallels
Mm-hmm.
to that. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, where I failed. I mean, and ironically, I didn't fully appreciate the active storytelling when I was using it naturally in my work years ago. I would use a story of a bad management experience when I was drop kicked into one of my first management jobs as a retail manager, and I wasn't trained. The market crap, everything that could go wrong. There was just a whole disaster. But I talked about hiring somebody and thinking, how much trouble could they get? They're only going to be in the store for 2 hours. Well,
Yeah.
apparently they can get a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
And I used that as a teaching moment to
Mm.
every hire that I was either training a hiring manager or training when I went into the corporate side. Um, I used it as an example in an interview, which took people by surprise because I was asking them to be vulnerable and tell me not what do you need to get better at? What do you need to improve? I wanted them to share with me what I called the 2020 question. Hindsight being 2020.
Yeah. Okay.
Where did they fail ethically? And what did they use from that experience? And how does it show up in life? So I got a lot of looks, but it was but what happened, so because I did that,
Mm.
when that person was in the interview process, I was able to advocate for them because we had had a real conversation besides facts and figures on their resume. When they got hired, I was able to advocate for them, saying, no, 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 there's much more to that person than you remember. Because as you know, sometimes in jobs we suffer from the recency effect. People only remember where you're doing in your current job, not your resume from way back when. So those things matter. And then some of those people that I didn't hire ended up being friends. One of the people, the podcast person, we weren't able to hire him, but we became friends and colleagues and
Mm.
collaborate. So something good comes out of those situations,
Mm. Mm.
and you learn
Right.
basically a lot about somebody. Hard to rehearse those when you're
Okay.
asking someone to be real in the moment.
Yeah.
You can memorize your answers, but those are usually a great source of inspiration and information.
And maybe this isn't where we wanted to go today, but
Mm.
where my brain is going to is okay. There's almost a process to to this, right? So
Mm-hmm.
um, I envisage sharing the story to allow people to open up, and then asking them to share a story. Then it's the ask a question and just listen, and then
Mm-hmm.
when there's an opportunity, ask another question, and
Mm-hmm.
and but listening, um, you know, a lot of people just listen with their ears, but I think you have to listen
Mm-hmm.
with your eyes. That's your psychology background,
Mm-hmm.
right? Right. So you see things, you watch behavior patterns, the whole behavior, body
Mm-hmm.
language, and tonality. And does that take a lot of training to teach somebody to be that focused and attentive to another person's story? Or
I think it's something we all have to learn how to do because we're living in a society like these little gadgets are, I'm just trying to show you my phone, are great. They are wonderful ways to connect and touch base, but they've also told us to have limited attention spans. So I think the story sharing that I'm talking about in that contained group requires people to be quiet. And even if they're loving what they hear, listen, I'm married to a Dublin Irishman who always wants to jut in and put his 2 cents in. So that's a whole navigation. But the point of being quiet and listening and holding your peace, no matter
mm,
what your reaction is, negative, emotional, is a trained mechanism. And I think what we get in trouble with our conversations, we're already writing the script in our head and the answer and figuring out where we want to jump in versus focusing on the dialogue. So it's like music, it's beats. It's
mm.
figuring out how many beats you can give that person before you come in with the big instrument next, our voice.
Yeah.
So it's and also
Mm.
it makes us pay attention to like, why do I need to speak up right away? Introverts have this down pat.
Yeah.
They're happy listening
Yeah.
and assimilating information, and because of that, when everyone has finished talking and using up all the oxygen in the room, they usually have powerful insights, and
Yeah.
I think they're gifts. And when I coach introvert clients, I'm always saying, don't apologize. Use that power of what you have, but also help other people
Mhm.
appreciate and know how they have to work with you when you're sitting there and looking at them going, okay, I'm
Mhm.
taking everything in here.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it. It's
Yeah.
a trained tool, but it's not impossible.
I
And
think,
I think, yeah,
sorry.
no,
Yeah. Uh, I was just going
no
to
worries.
say the key takeaway there is what I just did and maybe shouldn't have done was wait for the silence.
It's okay.
uh,
It's
but
okay.
but introverts don't have the desire to jump in because they got an idea triggered by something that
Hmm.
somebody else said. Whereas the extroverts are constantly, I use the phrase, when you make a judgment and you want to interject, you stop listening.
Hmm.
And that's really what you're saying as well, is careful of that need to jump in because you feel you have something to say, or you have
Hmm.
an idea, or you're right. The maybe you said earlier you like to note things down. Maybe noting it down, is that a
Hmm.
good technique for them to control that? Or
Absolutely. And it's the diversity of style. I mean, we need our type A people to say, get it done. Let's come to a decision. But sometimes other people in the room are not caught up, or they need, we could benefit from processing information and assimilating things before we go to final conclusions and getting
mm,
more input from different layers, because if someone doesn't have expertise or they're new to this industry or new to professional, they ask some interesting questions. And and a lot of times it could be annoying because you're like, okay, I want to get it done, I want to have a go-to thing to do,
yeah,
but that objectiveness yields sometimes a harvest of better ideas that happen because of that.
mm,
So it's figuring out the yin and yang of the patient. Where can we take this conversation, and where can people participate in
right.
different ways, even when that conversation.
So I'm just looking at the clock, and we're running
Mm,
out of time a little bit here. But um, is there, and maybe this is a point for the next session. We need to do this
I
again.
know you're not getting rid of me.
um, is there different types of storytelling? Like, I find myself sometimes, we're engaging in a dynamic conversation, and then somebody goes off into a story that I go, where are we going with this? Is there a relevance and a process for that? And you don't need to answer that right now, but
That I have an answer.
okay, cool.
Know your ending. Know your ending and why. There's the mini version of a story. There's the macro version,
Mm,
but it's curating. It's not to be robotic, but figure out where you're going when you tell the
mhm,
story or
mhm,
why it's happened.
yeah,
I mean, because the story might be great, but it doesn't fit in there. Like when I practice for a speech, I could be in love with this example, like, oh my God, this is great. But I need to throw it off the boat because it doesn't belong and it's not going to be helpful. So I always
right.
bring more than one thing with me, like
Mm,
virtually in my
yeah,
hip pocket, because it might not land. The group's not ready to go to that direction, or it's not important. Even though my ego would love to have a laugh, it's not important. Let it
right.
go. It'll live another day
Yeah,
someplace else. I think that's the important. We have to just resign ourselves that be flexible,
yeah.
and then spend more time listening and showing up for each other. My expression is meet me on my virtual front stoop, which is front steps is the
Right.
word in
Yeah,
most of America, but in
yeah,
Queens it's stoop.
yeah.
But it's finding more listening, which
Mm,
is a learned activity we can all benefit. You know,
right.
be better communicators and connectors.
Excellent. And as you know, we have a AccuMatch which allows us to map our neural uh, unconscious patterns. And I
Mm-hmm.
was just thinking, where I get stuck sometimes, and maybe some people are like that, is some big picture thinker,
Mm-hmm.
and someone's doing a story that has some metaphors but has no ending. As you say, I don't know where it's going, where it fits
Mm-hmm.
in. I'm lost in that, and I get impatient with, okay,
Mm-hmm.
what's happening here, right? So, um, but let's not analyze me. I'm happy to do your map at some
But
stage,
this was
actually.
getting interesting. This is what I love. I would tell me more.
Yeah, yeah. No, we're not going there today.
You fell for that last time. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Very good. So, look, thank you so much. Just before we leave, I like to, quickly summarize some of the key takeaways. What would you like to leave people as some of the key points for them to remember today?
you you tell your story and you cannot get it wrong. You can always enhance it because you're telling a truth and authenticity. Trust and that the fact when you are vulnerable with people and you step up as who you really are, it's a game changer. And also, like I just said, take time for listening. To do more listening than talking, and think of beats. You know, like a musical equation. Silence, there would not be any beautiful music if there wasn't a pause in between. So that's something we need to all remind ourselves to do is pause and listen.
Very powerful. Thank you so much. My brain's still going in a million miles an hour in many directions. That's
Thank
so
you.
much more that we could talk about. Loved having you. Thanks for being with us, Julienne, and Julienne Ryan, everybody. And please look her up, uh, JR,
Yes.
JRyanPartners.com. Sorry, I can't read without my glasses sometimes.
So J Ryan Partners, and the tagline is "Be engaged at work" and in our work. So
Awesome.
thank you so much. It's a thrill to be part of engaging your audience and sharing your story as well.
Thanks, Julienne. You take care.
Cheers.